We have a couple of members who will not be here, Mary Spildy and Dick Withnell. We have, who do we have on the phone there? Mark?
Yep, this is Mark.
You got a terrible echo there. Okay, so Seth,
Governor Kitzhaber.
here.
Julia Graham Edwards.
Present.
Yvonne Curtis.
Here.
Matthew Donegan.
Here.
Samuel Henry.
Here.
Nicole June Maher.
Here.
Mark Movahill.
He's on the phone.
Yeah.
Should we call him back?
Mark Movahill.
Here.
We're going to call you back, Mark. Stand by.
David Reeves.
Here.
Ron Saxton.
Here.
Mary Spildy. Gay Turan. Hannah Vandering. Dick Withnell.
Okay. Do we need to do something for?
Yes, on that dial out and then call that.
We have a quorum.
For everyone on the phone, we're going to have to hang up and dial back in.
You've got 7 if you've got Mark on the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, 7.
You should have.
Welcome to AT&T's teleconference. There are 3 participants on the call, including you. You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press *#.
Great. This is John Kitzhaber again. Who do we have on the phone? Mark Mulvihill?
Those are people getting around.
So who do we have on the phone?
This is Mark Withnell before the appointment is going here. Yep.
The mic. Because it's near the governor's mic.
Put it right.
Is that better? Nope. How about that?
Now it's gone dead completely.
That is the biggest soft drink I've ever seen.
I know, guilty. I can get Mark on his cell phone.
Let's do that for now. Put it on speaker and I'll figure out what's going on.
Okay.
Apologies.
Okay. Oh, we actually have a quorum.
Yeah, now we have a phone.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with the, while we're getting Mark on the cell phone. We need to move the approval of the minutes from the October 14th meeting.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. The OAIB approved the minutes from October 14th. Is there discussion? Is there objection? It's ordered. Okay. So I wanted to, the first agenda item here is feedback on the recommended budget that I'm in the process of putting together. And I just wanted to make a couple remarks to kind of tee this up and then hopefully have a good discussion of this. I think all of us are probably united in the belief that every Oregonian ought to have the opportunity to meet their basic needs and to have space to achieve their full potential and to have hard work rewarded with a better life and to be able to leave their kids better off than they were. A strong education is clearly the foundation that the state needs to move that belief to a reality. And of course that belief is at the core of our 40-40-20 goals. So it seems to me that success for all of our students depends on a couple of things. It depends on being more strategic in the way we have looked at the structure of our educational system to provide the highest quality learning opportunities from across a seamless continuum, and also on the way we make investments that line up with the outcomes that we're trying to achieve our 40-40-20 goals. So it's clear that we've got limited resources, even though the economy is improving. So we have to spend those limited resources in a way that tries to leverage best practices and leverage community initiative to achieve student outcomes across the continuum from birth to career. And I also think it's very, very important that we continue to break down the barriers that have been corrosive to opportunity, particularly for students of color and for children who are living in poverty. So that's basically why we're here today. At the last meeting, we approved the recommendations of the Outcome and Investment Subcommittee, more as a sort of a process vote. And as you recall, those recommendations are built around three pathways to kindergarten readiness and third grade reading, pathways to high school and post-secondary completion, and a pathway that connects education to careers. So each of those pathways incorporates a set of specific strategies and concepts, and as I promised, I took those and gave them to Budget Management and the Department of Education that costed out the cost of each one of those strategies, the number of students that would be affected, and the relationship between those investments and potential outcomes in our achievement, our compact goals. And so that's this big document you've got right here. It's got all the strategies, and it's got the cost of those strategies incorporated into it. So what I'm hoping will happen today is that you can give me a sense of priority among those individual strategies. It's unlikely that we are going to be able to do all of them given our budget constraints. So some sense of priority would be very valuable, recognizing, of course, that there is always that inherent tension between base budgets and new investments. So what I'm hoping to do in the way I frame the 2015-17 budget is to try to change the education concept or discussion, the education funding discussion in Oregon, from one in which the state is a passive funder to one in which the state is engaged in strategic investor of outcomes. So we want to know that our resources are actually linked to the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve. And as we put forward strategic investments and try to build a unified education budget, it's important to know that there's a strategic plan behind that, and one that will create the incentives for the institutional change that will actually allow us to provide opportunities for all of our students. I met informally with a number of you over the past week, and I've taken that input and incorporated into this lovely document, which Danny's going to describe and explain to you in a moment. But it is essentially a recommended set of investments that should not be viewed as a fait accompli, but rather the starting point of our conversation today. So as the OEIB, I think it's our opportunity to discuss the trade-offs and potential of a wide range of investments, because we know we have different leverage points and we need to try to use all the tools that we have. This set of investments here spans the continuum from birth to career, and it reaches beyond just the K-12 budget and reflects a concern both for early learning and for post-secondary education. Clearly, I think we recognize that the greatest return on investment is probably in early learning, in kindergarten readiness and third grade reading, and that priority is reflected in this document. With these investments, we can significantly expand the number of children who are in our early learning system and give them access to quality, affordable daycare so that their parents will know that they will be ready and know more numbers and more letters when they get to kindergarten. We can also align our early screening and intervention services with home visitation to actually try to reduce the known risks to educational outcomes. And we have a huge opportunity to build around full-day kindergarten to make sure that our early learning system and K-12 are actually aligned, and that schools and communities have the resources they need to focus on literacy and proven best practices in conjunction with community-based organizations. And I think that can dramatically increase the outcomes at third grade reading. But as Danny goes over it, we've also tried to address the needs of a variety of different groups. So for example, the incoming ninth grader who needs additional support, the first year teacher whose passion and commitment is clear but may need some mentoring in order to develop their practice, a high school student that could be earning college credit in high school with his spare time but is in a study hall, the student that is thinking about dropping out and needs exposure to career and technical education in order to get inspired and stay in school and graduate, and the first generation college student from rural Oregon who needs not only financial support but also the message that the best investment may be at an Oregon college. And finally, the student who has already dropped out and needs the wraparound services to actually get that high school equivalency. So it seems to me that as an investment board, we should be trying to look at investments that create the most impact on system change, that increase our outcomes to the maximum, and also scale up best practices across the range of students that we serve. So in addition to your input on the budget, and I'm not going to ask for a formal motion, but I just want to have the conversation, which then I'll try to reflect as we put the final budget together. I also want to signal to you and to our traditional historic educational stakeholders that I'm planning to set a significantly larger policy table that gives voice and power to educators and parents and communities and community-based organizations that reflect that subset of students that traditionally has not found an opportunity for advancement in our current educational structure. So with that, I will turn it over to Danny, and she can, if possible, explain what this means.
Thank you, Governor. So before you today, you have a map of what we like to see, a map of investments. And what this does is we try to both summarize the investments that you've seen before in the pathway document, but also set them into context with a couple of different frames. So to set some context, let me point you out to the left-hand column over here, where you have a white lane, a sort of lighter green lane, and then it gets darker and darker. So starting from the bottom, the sort of items that are in this last lane really represent an investment strategy around increasing or expanding a base level of funding to achieve outcomes within these systems. The sort of next lighter lane is to change the system incentives to produce outcomes within current funding. And this really is a place where we want to implement strategies to try to link our funding, more tightly link our funding to outcomes. This is the place where we're thinking about a different way to configure the way that we allocate funding so that it is tighter to the outcomes. The next lane talks about long-term systems change, where we're investing not only in the system, but also in the community-based potential of collective impact, and really trying to give more backbone support to a lot of that community-based, community-driven solutions that we know work really well. The last lane are the short-term strategic investments that really sort of build on some of the work that you've done in the last biennium around sort of a more directed, more sort of focus on outcomes within a shorter time period. I would say that these strategic investments aren't necessarily deemed as ongoing, but they are continuing to be a proof of concept and ideas that are promising that we may want to try to scale up in one of the other lanes in future years. So then, if we move over to the top sort of column right here, those are outcomes. They're not all of the outcomes, but those are key outcomes on the achievement compacts that where we wanted to show you where we can sort of make a big increase in the attainment of those outcomes. And you'll see that many of the investments span across each of those achievement compact areas. So then, if you look over to the right, we sort of have the equity lens. As you know, we've done a great amount of work with all of the education agencies, the commissions, and the stakeholder groups to really ask the questions on the equity lens that you've adopted and approved. And I think that what that has done is set the stage to think about how we might implement some of these strategies moving forward differently, continuing to use the good information and data that we've gathered from going through the equity lens process. So let's get into the meat of the matter. Let's start at the bottom. If you think about like where our base of funding is, The two places where we're suggesting, and where where the investment concepts that have come through, that support this type of investment are the first over in an expansion in higher ed affordability. And with that expansion, we see a potential to increase college completion, as well as be able to serve a greater number of students through financial aid. The next one is the third grade reading concept. And that concept really straddles two investment strategies. One being expanded capacity to provide third grade reading, as well as expanded funding to make sure that that opportunity of all-day kindergarten really is linked tightly with proven best practices around literacy, and making sure that that's aligned within schools, and that we're supporting schools' partnership and connection to community-based organizations to provide that added time, that added enrichment that supports the good learning that happens in classrooms. We move up to the next lane. We have 3 proposed funding formula changes. And those funding formula changes are changing the way, so the dollar amounts that you see aren't additional funding, but really represent a reallocation within the funding. And if you'll notice, there is a pretty significant opportunity, we believe, to close the achievement gaps for those targeted students, as well as to provide ongoing sustainable funding for types of programs like this. So the 9th grade on track funding formula change, the CTE funding formula change, and the English language learners formula change are there. All in, it's a little over $120 million of a reallocation. We also have the higher ed productivity investment in there, and that really is investment that acknowledges we want to continue to invest on the other end of the spectrum for education funding in higher ed, but we want to link that funding to allocating, to incentivize not necessarily enrollment, but completion. So as we move up into the next area, what we heard from folks is really wanting to reinforce 2 different types of practices. So support for educators, so that we're supporting mentoring, the ability to hear more and learn more about culturally responsive best practices, dual language immersion, providing more time for collaboration within districts, as well as thinking about how we can provide more support for focus and priority schools, both at the district level as well as the school level. That sort of suite of investments really represent that network for quality teaching. And we see being able to see some increases not only in one compact area, but really spans between kindergarten readiness all the way through looking at getting into some places beyond high school completion. The next type of strategies really rest on this collective impact model. So the early learning set of investments, these 3 represent not only an investment to expand the number of children and families that can be served in home visiting programs, in screening, in childcare slots, but it also represents significant amount of systems change work to build up the system of the early learning hubs, as well as thinking about how we can leverage these investments to expand service and to continue to try to push on systems change to better support early learning and the outcomes that we know that we can get there. The STEM hubs and strategies is another place where we're relying on that sort of collective impact model. We're not only looking at investing in strategies that connect students to high-wage, high-demand careers, but also looking at how we engage with communities differently to do that work. The personal achievement record you all are familiar with. This is support for the longitudinal database as well. So we move up into the final lane. We have, we basically created a new category calling that 11 by 14 based on some really good feedback from folks. And that's where we've put together the accelerated learning investments, as well as some of the math and English realignment and instructional redesign. So it can really make sure that we're paying attention to those critical transitions between high school and college. We're doing some work to make sure that some of the promising practices and homegrown projects like Eastern Promise are really replicated throughout the state, but then also continuing to dig deep to make sure that we're doing some systems change work there. The high school equivalency work, this is a pretty small investment given the potential for its impact around the achievement compacts. This proposes not only providing more funding for the equivalency exam itself, but also thinking about how we can support some of the practitioners who provide the prep for that as well. And then CTE revitalization really looks to support and expand some of the work that's been done around revitalization grants. Adding to that and thinking about a strategy for student engagement and also really thinking about how to engage students in a way that supports the pathway development, career pathway development, as well as thinking about how we can reinforce regional work that's going around there. So you'll notice that not all of the investments from the big list are on here. We looked at the number of students that are served, the potential outcomes, as well as the investment and the investment type. And we think that this is a good starting place to sort of to think about the whole package for investments. And we'd love to hear your feedback.
Just jump in? Do you want people to just jump
Yeah,
in?
just jump in. I mean, this is just a really brought here for discussion purposes, and I'm just interested about, what you like, what you don't like, what makes you nervous, what's in it, what isn't in it, because that will be very useful for me when we sort of put the final budget together. And if you have questions, and if Danny confused you, then you can get clarification from her. Yep, Nicole?
So there's many things I like about this budget. I think the acknowledgement and deep investment and clear priority around early childhood and third grade reading are right on, and I think they're really reflective of the values and beliefs that so many constituents have shared with us throughout our public testimony and throughout conversations that I know many of us have had with folks reflecting all different parts of education. So I feel really strongly that that's a wise and good investment. I also am very pleased to see that the high school equivalency is included. I recognize it's a small amount of money, but I think as it pertains to the impact we'll have with, I believe that this will impact close to 50,000 students, and I think that the return on investment is really profound. And considering we have such a significant number of students who are out of school, this is really our only area we're investing in that, so I'm very pleased to see that because that population doesn't get spoken about enough. Lastly, I think it's really important to note that one of the things I really like about this portfolio is that it is truly transformational. It's the first step to this board really realizing our potential around being transformational leaders in education and truly budgeting to outcomes. So I'm fully supportive of the formula change, and I think that is really important because I know I personally signed up to be part of this board to make real change and to really develop strategies that meet the needs of the students who we have historically left out. And I think that this is a great portfolio in that aspect, and I really appreciate that equity and serving students who've been left out are really clearly expressed in every part of this document from higher education throughout, and so I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, what's on the chart looks good. There's certainly a high priority. I just was trying to find my original copy we've been working for the last few months about what didn't make the cut or what was left off.
Danny?
Sure. So a couple of things that were left out were I would say the reason that they were left out is because they were, not necessarily that they weren't good ideas, they were still in development. So the blended advising, for example, that is one that didn't necessarily rise as a priority. The post-secondary talent development, I think people provided feedback that they thought it was important, but there was still some work to do to work through that. And that it wouldn't preclude, not investing at the time wouldn't preclude some of that work being done. The youth and community investment, while there's a big commitment to the population of folks that it serves, I think folks felt like there was some more work to be done to try to think about how to continue to increase those investments, their ability to make some outcomes change. One of the things, dual language progress monitoring isn't on there because we essentially enveloped that into the K through 3 reading. So it's not expressed in there, but we mentioned that investment would be part of that. And I believe that's it since the pathways document.
Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate really this visual because as Nicole was suggesting that it, not only the priorities, but the way it's been represented clearly does call out the population of students we've been wanting to reach, the overlap, and I really like how the collective impact is rooted firmly in the center, really, of that work. It seems to visually, and I think that that's where we're going to start to maximize what we are applying to the work and in terms of getting the outcomes. I think that what we're paying attention to are the right things. I appreciate the dollar amounts and the understanding the populations we're trying to achieve as well as the outcomes. So I'm looking forward to when we get to dig down into what that really looks like and what kinds of programs and things are going to be happening in the schools. I just think this has really become very, very clear. So I hope that for the statewide community, I hope people understand the direction that we're going because I think we've come a long way and I appreciate all the hard work.
Nancy?
Yeah, that's Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. Just kind of echo some of those things. What I really liked in this visual was the entire P20 spectrum, was what we are all about. I also really appreciate the link to the achievement concept indicators. We've got traction on schools and universities looking differently at versus attendance. So I think by putting the achievement concept indicators, that's a real plus. And just kind of in summary, I strongly support this and believe that we've spent the last 3 years kind of forming the planet in this next budget. Those priorities you see in this document are kind of putting life on the planet. And I really think we're going to see the dial move in the next 3 to 4 years.
Life on the planet.
Thank you. I'll echo what I guess the others have said about appreciating the process. I was, critical of the process a couple months ago, and I think we've seen some real improvement here in terms of.
That's just Mark.
It's just 'cause, so he can hear.
Yeah.
He's going to interrupt.
You can control that.
So I want to thank the governor and Nancy and Danny and the rest of the staff for being responsive to some of those concerns that were raised about both the process, about provision of information, and really, to be honest, about the use of this committee. I think the right way to use this committee is to have us dig into some of these things about types of investments and where we ought to be putting the money. And anyway, thank you all for that. In terms of some specific comments, I understand this is everything's sort of a compromise, and I'd probably be a little more radical, and some people would be a little less radical, but I do absolutely agree with, I think it was Nicole's comment, that this has taken a step in moving us towards the kind of transformation we need, and absolutely an improvement on the status quo, and so I'm very happy about that. The 3 formula changes I think are really important, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I think there are others we can talk about, but I support the changes, and I think it's very important to make those kind of changes. I absolutely support this focus on the mentoring and the school district collaboration fund, and As I said in earlier discussion, I don't feel able to say, is that the right amount of money or not, or should we put a few more dollars behind those? But I think those are really important initiatives, and we need to make sure they're successful. Just a few comments beyond that. Like I said, I think the 3 formula changes are good. They all basically incentivize performance at the higher end, or the older students along this. I'd really like to see at some point staff coming back with how we could make some changes that provide some incentives at the early end of the spectrum. So that's one comment. But second, I really feel like at all levels we need to move the formula away from funding based on attendance. We talk about that as a concept. This moves it that way. It doesn't move it. I mean, I'm happy to take steps and know we have to do things in steps, but we need to be planning next steps, because attendance to me is the worst measurement of, for what we fund, and it's how we still hand out most of the money. I'd like us to stay focused on completion. We talk about that, high school, college, other programs and so forth. That's ultimately, 40-40-20 is really a measurement of satisfactory completion, not just jumping through the hoops, but getting through it. And so that's a focus. And when we look at this, we talk about sort of a 10 to 14 kind of thing. But the truth is, although I don't like silos, I'm going to talk about one for a minute. Kids going to community college to do remediation means high school didn't do their job. And so paying twice for that isn't a good use of our money. High schools are supposed to be graduating students ready to go on. And we've got to incentivize, high schools or K through 12 systems, that it really is their job to get that done, not to pass that duty on to the community college, which then diverts money that ought to be being used for more truly higher education kind of purposes. And my last comment is, as we look at the chart, I think it's some very good investments in K through 12. It's some very good investments in early learning. I know we don't have enough money for everything we'd like, but I'd someday like to see more of an investment in higher education. Can go on and on, as Nicole said, but I'll stop there.
Anna?
So I really appreciate the acknowledgement of the third grade reading and how important that is to us really improving education in Oregon. I think the investment that we are making in kindergarten is really important. Heard several comments around what's going on in our schools and whether teachers are doing their job or not doing their job. And I'm frankly a little disappointed. We've spent a lot of time in the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee, and then we spent time last week talking about those things that were important. And everything's still on here, and it's still, instead of talking about the fact that, when Measure 5 passed, we said the state was going to fund public education. And we know what that means, to fund education through the quality education model, and yet we're not doing that, but we're saying high schools aren't doing their jobs when they've got 50 students in a science class. I'm not sure how they can do their job. I'm not sure how we can push any harder. And I agree, we are absolutely not providing the learning conditions for our students that they deserve. And that's why I was so excited about being on this board, to make sure that we did invest and that we did provide those learning environments that are necessary. In the investments that we have, we talk a lot in here again on incentives for the outcomes that we want. We've just adopted the Common Core standards, and I think that's the outcomes. We want those students to be able to reach the benchmarks. And in order for us to obtain that, then we have to provide the support that's necessary for educators to provide the education where students can't. And we're talking about formula changes that I know there's a big meeting on Saturday and lots of talk about that, but it doesn't seem to matter what comes forward as far as how it impacts. It just keeps moving. The investment that we make in mentoring, we talked about those things that matter. We talked about third grade reading and higher ed affordability. But it just feels like we're pretending. And Governor, I really appreciate you asking for input, and that's why I'm excited about being here and being able to give that. But I really believe that The incentives are a slap in the face of the educators that work in this state. To think that you're going to incentivize us out of this hole is not correct. We've got to invest in our students. We've got to show them that we really care, that we're not going to allow 44 kindergarten students in a classroom anymore, that we're not going to allow students who need special assistance to not have that special assistance because we're not willing to fund it. And I know there's not an ever-ending supply of money, but I think we haven't taken the time to really listen to what school administrators at the building level, at the district level, and then the educators are saying that they could do if, one, they didn't have all the mandates that are pushed on them, and two, if they had the support of the funds to be able to provide the learning environment. So out of this list, I would fully support the third grade reading. I think we've got to move the dial. I really appreciate all the work that's being done there. I think the Network for Quality Teaching, we're spending so much money because we're not mentoring new educators in the field, that would be highly effective tool. We have to do, but we have to do better. We have to reach deeper to find where the real levers are to be able to change the instructional practice in the schools, and I think that's going to come through the ongoing conversations that I hope we will have with the educators.
So if I could just interject one thing, I wanted to make sure that we were sort of looking at these proportional. I think that could respond both to Ron's sort of radical desire as well as Hannah's, some of Hannah's comments. If we were to look across the lanes and looked at the proportion of the total investment by lane, I did some quick math, and Rob Saxton will let me know if I did it incorrectly. But the bottom, essentially, and maybe there's a way to better show this graphically, but the bottom represents the most significant investment. So that, if you added those together, that would be $537 million, so over $500 million. The next one, the change systems incentives, is truly the 119 is the reallocation. The 70 is additive to, so you could probably even add that to the bottom one as well. It would kind of be one of those stragglers. But that's around 200 million, where we're sort of reallocating. The systems change, where we're sort of investing in the systems, including a significant investment around early learning. It's a little bit less than 200 million, it's 191. And then the top one, the strategic investments, it's essentially around 36 million. So in terms of the pyramid, if you we're almost sort of suggesting a pyramid of investments that together is a good, so I think it's just a good, in terms of, as you give the governor your feedback, sort of seeing that proportion would be important.
Yes, David?
Yeah, no, I do appreciate the way these are broken out on the chart with short-term, long-term, and now I'm seeing the base of the pyramid in the top two. I think it's good we're finally looking at affordability of post-secondary education. That's something that's been neglected as the funding has been decreased over the last decade. I must say the formula changes. It's just called higher ed productivity in here because the formula hasn't been agreed upon. And there is talk about outcomes-based funding. We do have to talk more about that. I've spoken to the HEC Finance and Achievement Committee too, the need for a real review period of that as the proposals are rolled out, which they haven't been rolled out yet. They are to be in the beginning of December. But there is some, I think, some very healthy skepticism among many about what other states have done in this direction that hasn't really been shown to be effective. So I think it may be something we keep in mind and maybe try for newer ways of looking at that than what's already been done in other states. Like I said, the proposals haven't come out yet, but that's what the data is indicating so far.
Sam?
Well, I just want to compliment my colleagues in the governor's office on the work that's been done. I know I've gotten older and grayer while I'm on the OEIB, and hoping that, I shaved the beard off this morning because it looked too quiet, and hoping that we would actually get around to doing something. And I'm really glad that this is our blueprint for the next step. I'm still pushing for the blueprint beyond that, as several of my colleagues have alluded to. I'm just completely tickled with dealing with the ELL. You've heard me rant about that before, but I do want to say to my colleagues, I'm really glad we've gotten to this point. I appreciate the governor's hard work and those on his staff, Danny and others, and I think we need to move on this and do it. Don't want to get grayer while I'm waiting.
Do you want to go, Matt, or go ahead? So I want to just echo Ron's comments that I was one of the early people who asked for the dollar amount and student impacts. So I really appreciate the work that the OEIB staff and the governor's office did to provide us with that, because I think it gave us a sense of.
Hear you, though, please.
I'm sorry.
Here we go.
I was just saying that I appreciate the work from the governor's office and the OEIB in terms of supplying us with the cost estimate, student impacts, and then also how it impacts students along the trajectory. When I look at this, I guess I have a couple thoughts, and I think I'm going to start with just the sort of the left side, for the 0 to 5, and then work my way across. But I think I would say the investment in third grade reading, full day kindergarten is something that I fully support. If you just look at the sort of impact and the estimate that this will get 95% of the students to third grade reading benchmark, if we will have done that, or if that's the outcome of the investment, I think that's a great foundation to get students started within our system. Likewise, looking at the ELL formula changes and making sure that the funds designated for ELL students actually are targeted to ELL students, I think is a really important concept. And again, the projected 20% increase in ninth grade on track. I think that's another great, if we can accomplish that or support that work in the schools, will be really important. I want to go back to something that I've talked about at a couple other meetings, is the two investments in higher ed affordability and higher ed productivity, and really want to emphasize that I think those that should be linked to, and the sequencing should be enhanced with this, the investment at the upper right hand corner, which is the accelerated learning and math and English alignment. I would have just a little bit different take than Ron on this, in that I look at this as more of a lack of the students who are having to take remedial courses, and there are quite a bit. The Accelerated Learning Committee had 60% of the high school graduates needing some sort of remediation. Is that part of that is a disconnect or a non-alignment between our standards at the K-12 level and the placement, the variety of placement tests that are taken. So the investment in the math and English alignment, I think, so not to point fingers at either the K-12 or the higher ed, because we don't want community colleges to lower their standards. And I also think there's a lot of good work. I think students, when they pass Algebra 2, rightfully would think that they should be able to go to a community college and not need remediation. So I think this is going to, I just want to make sure that that sequencing happens. We don't just make a significant investment in higher ed affordability and productivity and ignore an obvious disconnect and then end up paying for things twice. Fully support the work that was done in the Equity and Partnership Committee. I think around the high school equivalency, small dollar investment, big payback for out-of-school youth. And I think one thing, I'm just going to, speaking as a parent about the personal achievement record, and this is not speaking to the longitudinal database aspect of it, but the personal achievement record, I think every student and their family having access to information about where they are sort of in their journey through the system, where there's challenges or more support is needed. I think that's giving real-time tools to students and their family. I know as a parent in Portland Public Schools, the fact that I can go online and see where my child is in terms of all their classes and progress to graduation. I think it is sort of turning over some of the sort of secret things that were in the black box earlier, maybe in the grade book that you couldn't see before. This really provides a lot of information, opened up conversations between parents and teachers, and I think only supports families. So I think this is overall a set of investments that potentially moves us forward on the 40-40-20. So I want to thank the staff and for the work that was happened over the last couple of months.
Thanks. Matt?
Well, thank you, Governor. And I want to echo all the appreciation that's been extended to the staff and all the time that Nancy and others have spent with me to get me up to speed on this. And I guess the first big takeaway is I really appreciate the framework. I think this is, I think OEIB as being a bit of a startup, it's been a bit of a challenge for folks, including members of this board, to understand exactly what our deliverables are, and I think this goes a long way to helping at least me, I think some others, understand what we do and what our deliverables are. So I think this is a great framework, not only for now, but into the future. I think we've got the right transition points in terms of really breaking down the P20 and helping folks understand what that means. I think these are the right leverage points or points of impact. And then I guess the big question becomes, where do we get the biggest uplift? I think we talk about ROI, which I think it's a fairly ambiguous term, but I think uplift and where do we get the biggest bang for the buck? And I think that'll be kind of 2.0, 3.0 future generations. Hopefully we'll better understand if we have an extra dollar, where do we get the biggest impact, 40-40-20 for our kids, for the economy. I think for a 1.0-ish, this is a good starting point, because I do think, hopefully with the heavy emphasis on third grade reading, that seems like there's some common ground between the voices for baseline funding and voices for transformation. I think we can all agree on third grade reading as being a high priority. I think that heavy emphasis on post-secondary affordability is also a good emphasis. But again, I think in future generations, really focusing our attention on uplift and marginal uplift is going to be very, very helpful. I'll just say I've heard, I've sat in some very encouraging meetings with regard to high school equivalency. $2 million seems like a very light investment given what you see in terms of real impact. We're having a lot of success, and with communities that we care about. And this committee is specifically tasked with addressing. So, and then my gut's telling me we have a pretty darn high ROI there, big uplift. So $2 million now seems light instinctively, but I think as we 2.0, and we kind of look into the future and really look at marginal ROI. Hopefully we get more sophisticated and a little bit more advanced there. But I think for right now, where this group is, I think these are the right priorities. And again, I want to extend my thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Should we
Yeah.
Can we just take a minute to see who's on the line? So if you could let us know who you are.
Mark Mulvihill.
An awful lot of beeping if he's the only person on.
I tried to get on, couldn't get on.
Who else do we have online?
Well, So let me just conclude. So first of all, this has been really useful to me. We've got obviously to get the budget put away on Friday. It'll come out on the 1st of December. So I will do everything I can to try to incorporate these into the budget, which we also know is a starting point for the legislative debate, but try to really take the savings that we've accumulated in any resources and put them behind really smart investments and outcomes. I do want to say, in relation to the Measure 5 gap that was created, this has gone largely under the radar screen, but we have over 1 million people now in a care model that's growing at 3.4% a year, which is slower than inflation. We extended that to PEB last year, and the savings were so significant that we were able to give the negotiated COLA 6 months early. And we want to have conversations, and you and I have had this conversation about looking at a similar model with OEB. The projections are that if you have that group of people in a care model that's growing at 3.4% a year, we would eliminate the Measure 5 structural budget deficit by the 2019-21 biennium and actually have a structural surplus by 21-23. Now, assume the kicker doesn't kick and the economy doesn't drop out. But that's really significant because, as Hannah said, for 20 years we've been sort of behind the curve, and this gets us to a position where economic growth actually results in the opportunity for some deep investment. So I don't want that to get lost in the way. I think it's a very, very significant accomplishment that actually interfaces with our efforts to reinvest in education. So with that, we will yes, please.
Sorry. I just wanted to make one more comment as I was listening to speak and thinking about the work and advice that I think you've heard today. And I think one part that's really important is recognizing that we're going to make this set of policy recommendations to you. You will then have a budget, and then it will go to the legislature. And I think that's where it gets really tricky. And I think that one thing that's really important from my perspective is that what I like about this is that it's a portfolio and that there's both additional resources, and I think we're trying to hold up our end of the bargain by investing additional resources, and we're asking for transformation. I think just more money to our system as it stands will continue to have the same disparate outcomes where there will be winners and losers among our children. And so it's really a balance and a portfolio approach. And so I think it could get very tricky if it's just more money without the transformation. We won't get the outcomes that we want. And I think the other part is that the first few years of OEIB have really been about building a new system and a new governance structure. And I think Rob and his team have been working very hard to build a new Oregon Department of Education. And I think there's been a lot of those changes, and I would hate for that to be lost as we move out of just our policy roles.
Thank you. Okay. We are delighted to have with us the Secretary of State to go over the audit report. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor and members of the OEIB. For the record, I'm Kate Brown, currently serving as Oregon Secretary of State. I think you all know as the Secretary of State, I get to oversee the Audits Division, and which is one of my great pleasures. And we really appreciate the opportunity today to share our auditing work with you. This spring, our auditing team completed an audit of what we call the achievement gap in Oregon. And we measured the gap by comparing groups of students' 8th grade test scores on the Oaks test in math and reading in the 2011-2012 years. And according to the research, a 5-point gap in test scores is roughly equal to 1 year of learning. Using this standard, Latino students, Black students, and economically disadvantaged students as a group were at least 1 year behind their counterparts. I don't think that's surprising to anyone in this room. The bottom line is that these statistics are unacceptable, and the doors to success will be closing to these children if we don't do something fast. All these findings from the audit are pretty disheartening. We did find some success stories, schools that can serve as models for the rest of the state. My auditing team toured 9 of the 39 middle schools that have been successful at working at closing the achievement gap. I was able to tour one of them. It happened to be Walker Middle School in Salem, and they are successfully closing the achievement gap as well. I was able to meet with principal, educators, and students, and was really impressed with their efforts. We saw at Walker Middle School, like the other states, or the other schools that have been successful at closing the achievement gap, 5 successful best practices. And I want to share with you what I saw at Walker in terms of the success of these best practices. First of all, at Walker, they created a safe and positive learning environment for the students. In meeting with the students, they told us they loved their teachers and they really liked going to school. Secondly, the school sets very high expectations and support. At Walker, all of the teachers expected all of their students, regardless of income or race, to be prepared to go to college. So that meant every single day, they are preparing their students to succeed in high school. Outside of each classroom, and I really love this, is a placard saying where the teachers graduated from colleges or multiple colleges. And on Fridays, they would wear the college jersey or t-shirt of their choice to familiarize the students with the different colleges. The teachers that I met were Ducks, Beavers, and Western Oregon University is the Timberwolves. Okay. So I mentioned safe, positive environment and high expectation and support. The third best practice is teacher collaboration, and the educators at this school worked in teams to tackle issues that they were having in the classroom or with particular students. It created a very warm learning environment and teaching environment. The educators described it as being part of a family. The fourth best practice, data-informed instruction. What was really exciting to me is that the students knew their test scores coming in at the beginning of the school year, and their test scores already improved.
Reflecting.
Okay, good feedback. They knew their test scores at the end of the year, so they knew their individual successes, and that was really, really important. The teachers knew those numbers as well.
Add with folks.
Please, could you put your phone on mute? We're hearing your conversation. Thank you.
Lastly, strong leadership was the fifth best practice that we've seen. The principal at Walker said he treated all of these children like they are his kids, and they are. They're truly all of our children. So these are really common sense approaches. I know we can do this. I just want to share in closing a story from 2 of the students that I met at Walker Middle School. Their names were Kaylin and Victoria, and they gave me a tour of their school. Victoria told me she wanted to go to Harvard Law School, which I thought was pretty impressive. And then I asked her whether she wanted to be president of the United States. She said, yes, that's on the list. I thought it was impressive. I asked her friend Kaylin what she wanted to be, and Kaylin wants to be a doctor. And so I asked her whether she wanted to be the president's doctor, and she said, no, I want to be the Surgeon General. Well, all of our children may not run for president. We want them to be able to achieve our dreams. And our job is to invest in our schools in a way that closes the achievement gap in every school in every corner of this state. So thank you very much, Governor. I'm going to turn it over to our crack auditing team.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Gary Blackmer. I'm the Director of the Secretary of State Audits Division. With me is Sharon Blasi. She was the audit manager over this audit, and she's here to answer all of the technical questions I'm sure you're going to handle to work with PowerPoint, which will help me. As the Secretary of State, we analyzed 8th grade book scores for reading and math, and we focused in on achievement gaps, and we did find significant gaps. Looking statewide, a 5-year gap. When we looked over time, we saw that, the 5-point gap, which is 1 school year. When we looked over an 8-year period, the gap was not closing. We also looked at individual schools, looking at their particular, the populations and the gaps for reading and math, and we only found that about a third of them were actually able to close one of those gaps, maybe more, but none of them were able to close all the gaps. So let me walk quickly through some methodology here. We chose to measure the average scores as opposed to the percent achieving proficiency because it allowed us to actually look at the gaps a little easier and look at the actual scores that were occurring. And so what we focused in on were the populations that the reference group was white, non-economically disadvantaged, and we compared that with the economically disadvantaged. We also looked at Hispanic, Black, Native American, Pacific Islander, Asian, and white. So breaking that down, what we saw was that the economically disadvantaged were those that were receiving free and reduced lunch. And so what we did was when we looked at the gaps, we saw that there was, let's see, what else am I missing? Did I get everything? Good, okay. When we looked at the gaps, what we saw was this 5-point difference. And it, as you can see, it's scarcely diminished over the period of time we looked at. That is for math scores. And so what we saw was not a lot of progress in terms of the achievement gap. So we ended up...
Excuse me,
Mike?
quick question, just definitional so I know what I'm looking for. So is this economically disadvantaged inclusive of all the other subgroups, or is that a different group?
It's white, economically
It's white.
non-disadvantaged.
Right, I got that, but the economically disadvantaged, is that inclusive of all the others?
Is it disaggregated or is it just?
Oh, it's all the economically disadvantaged.
Okay, so this will include folks from all the other groups there.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So Eco Northwest and Chalkboard Project did some research on the points and the scoring and basically estimated that 5 points was equivalent of 1 year of difference in abilities in achievement. So by that measure, essentially the gap there represents 1 full year of the disadvantaged students being behind the advantaged students in terms of math. In reading, you'll see the same gap is there. It only very slightly decreased during the time period, but again, it's 4.3 points, which is nearly a year lag between those students that were economically advantaged versus those that were economically disadvantaged. In terms of breaking it out a little differently, what we did was we looked at how the students, looking at well, let me go to the table, the overall table here. This has all of those categories in it. And what you'll see is there's a reference group. Above the first blue bar is math, below the blue bar is reading. The reference group average score, you can see, is 241.4. And then below that for Asian, they actually had a negative achievement gap. They scored 246.5, so they actually scored higher than the reference group. In contrast, Black students, they scored 233.7, which is 7.6 points below the reference group, which is essentially a year and a half of difference in terms of the achievement. Hispanics, a 7 points difference between the reference in math and that population. Native American, 5.9. Pacific Islander, 2.8. The overall average gap, 5.3. So going down into reading, similar patterns. Asian, we still had a negative, but it was only 0.4. 6.0 for Black students, the difference between 238.6 for the white, non-economically disadvantaged and the Black students. Hispanic, 6.6. Native American, 5.0. Pacific Islander, 3.9 for an overall reading gap of 4.1. The economically disadvantaged is to the far right there, and that the numbers are very slightly different in the reference group because they do comprise a slightly different group than the comparators for the racial and cultural breakdowns. But essentially the same pattern holds, but 5.3 for math and 4.3 for reading.
So where do white, just economically disadvantaged kids appear on here? Is that gap measured somewhere?
That's the 5.3.
It looks like that's everybody.
That's everybody.
So have you,
It includes, but they aren't broken out in the table here.
Is there a reason? I mean, that's a pretty substantial population in our state of poor white children.
If you look at slide 7,
Yes.
it looks like a blue dash.
So the blue dad, okay, on page
So
7.
like on slide 7, you'll see the blue dash is tied with the black non-disadvantaged, so it's
Oh, yes, you can see it on the chart here, the lines, the dash lines, the difference between the white not disadvantaged and the white economically disadvantaged. So I don't know, does that answer your question? It's about, again, a 5 point.
It's a lot of kids. I want to make sure we keep our eye on that population too.
Plus, that population of children in poverty is growing as well
Right.
as part of our school population.
do you have the numbers that this graph was taken off of?
We have the appendix.
Yeah, this is a very nice chart here because it's actually got the numbers and you're kind of eyeballing the percentages on the, so that would be useful if you, I don't mean it now, I mean if you had, that would be
We can
useful.
get it to you, Governor.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Okay, this, continuing with this chart, as we noted, the white disadvantaged and not disadvantaged had about a 5-point gap. But the white economically disadvantaged scored roughly the same over this time period as the black not economically disadvantaged. So essentially, when you look at, there's a dash line which is in the middle of those bars, those lines, that really roughly parallels a light blue line. That's those two populations. The white not disadvantaged is the top dashed line there. So it's a 10-point gap between the white non-disadvantaged and the black disadvantaged. So there's a big gap there that we found among the 8th grade students. And this is in math. And a similar pattern holds for the reading.
So was there any information, do you have any facts around the test? Because we're using the Oaks test, and the Oaks test is culturally biased. Do we have anything that shows that gap so that we can understand what we can do as educators to use an assessment that actually is appropriate, so we're not putting students at a disadvantage? Because my understanding is they are culturally biased, and correct me if I'm wrong, but do we have any data on that?
No, we don't. We use the Oaks test as a basis for evaluating where we were. We didn't look at the other alternatives that are out there in terms of scoring.
So Hannah, it's your point that the Oaks test itself may skew the results?
I believe that the test is culturally biased. That's everything that I've seen on the way that we use the Oaks test and other high-stakes standardized tests. So I think it would just be really good for us to understand what that is, and then what can we do to make sure that we're putting every effort in place that we can to reach out to all students. And I think that's something that would help us understand truly where we're really missing the mark and where we need to make some changes.
Governor Hanna agreed. The challenge with auditing work is like it's a snapshot in time. So it's a view of what happened in the past, and obviously that was the testing that were being used in the past. I know we're moving to new tests, And we are very happy to explore these issues moving forward. If the OEIB has a specific direction for us, that would be helpful for us. This audit was suggested to us by a number of folks, but Deputy Rob Saxton was very adamant that we pursue this issue, particularly since I think it's really the first time in Oregon history that we've had more than a couple years data in terms of race segregated data.
Secretary, the question I have is whether there's any evidence that the outcomes would be different if we had different tests, because I think the achievement gap is a consistent theme throughout the state of Oregon and all districts for all kids. The other question I have is whether or not the elements that produce positive results can be replicated in other places, because what we're trying to do is to directly address the achievement gap. And if there's some themes that are consistent in the schools that you visit or the schools that you study, there might be a way to replicate that. I mean, share that information to replicate those results.
We actually looked at a variety of, we looked at the school building level also to understand what was happening. And we did see the gaps closing in 39 schools, and we went out and visited to see what was going on. We did research on what are kind of the evidence-based practices that help close that gap, and we went out to see if that was actually occurring in those schools. We'll be showing you some examples of that as we go forward. But yeah, rather than focusing on the schools that were, not kind of failing, we want to look at those schools that were achieving closure of that gap and find out what they were doing, and it did match up with best practices research. So I think that kind of goes back to the issue about the test score. No matter what the data is, I'm always cautious about trying to take it too far and trying to tie it in with what's happening in the classroom, what the experiences are of the teachers and the principals. And so from our standpoint, we felt like just looking at the data wasn't enough, but to go out and actually talk to some of the people involved with succeeding in closing the gaps.
I think Chalkboard has similar results.
So just to build on Kay's comment, I had an opportunity to hear this presentation this summer at the Confederated Oregon School Administrators Summer Conference. But I think you had 3 or 4 principals with you. It was a great presentation, lots of really practical sort of best practices, how they were implemented at the school level. I think one thing I've asked, and I think we had this conversation after the presentation, is, how could ODE somehow sort of share the best practices? So the people who were in the room at COSA, I think a lot of really practical ways that small changes, some of them that cost no money, that how they welcome students, integrated them into the school community and raised expectations for all students, really could be spread across the state. So I don't know if that's sort of a logical next step of the audit, or if that's the pass off to Deputy Superintendent Saxton, but it was really powerful. And I think the other thing with the principals in the room, all of them spoke to, it wasn't just even though one of the elements is a strong leadership, that they all spoke to the relationship between the principals and the teachers in the school of being the sort of mechanism by which things change for kids.
Yes, Governor, the 5 best practices, what I mentioned in my presentation, are basically what we saw in all of the 9 middle schools that our audit team visited. That would be the safe and positive school environment, the high expectations and support, teacher collaboration, data-informed instruction, and strong leadership. And that's different. These are best practices that we identified in our audit, which is different than the 4 recommendations that the audit came up with. But certainly one of the reasons we're here today is because I feel strongly that this body can play a role in terms of ensuring that these 5 best practices can be implemented throughout the state. And one of the things that the schools told us that we visited, certainly more resources always always helps, and more money is a good thing, and our schools do need more money. But the reality is that the 39 middle schools that have been able to focus on closing the achievement gap, they were able to do it by virtue of focus and leadership without any additional resources. So they focus their efforts on closing the achievement gap and use these 5 best practices.
And one of the things that we wondered about was more resources and attention being redirected in the schools, and they were emphasizing every student. So every student benefited from these practices. So it was really, it was a very kind of invigorating bunch of site visits for the audience. They felt really good when we came back.
I just want to first of all thank you. This is really useful, and I know that it's been out since April, and we did read this, use it, think about it when we came up with our strategic investments. I think you can see some of them, like teacher collaboration reflected in there, priority and focus schools learning from model schools. I also believe in the future it's one of the power of the achievement compact, because if we look at like schools and see which schools are reaching the goals we can do with our small little research team along with the people at OD, we can, like you, go out, see best practices, start matching schools up. So this is really a key piece of information as we looked at our investments, and just to really have, I agree with you, Secretary, that this body can do a lot to really take this and move forward. So I appreciate the work. And Rob's going to, after we get the questions answered, he's going to talk a little bit about what we've already done. So Matt had something. Matt?
Thank you. And I just want to echo just how informative this is and my appreciation. I guess one question is more the P20 kind of dimension of this, and wondering if there's anything we can learn about, since this is 8th grade, were there any differences discernible before you get to 8th grade and some of the earlier learning experiences? Were there at least some of the performance differences from the higher performing schools? Were any of those attributable to better preparation early on? Did you get a chance to look at the kind of the temporal dimension of this? And are we serving our, well, I guess that's one question. So is part of this attributable to the other schools in the system? And then the second piece is, I find myself wondering, if we were to look at some measures earlier on, say 3rd grade, and then compare that to 8th grade, are we improving, or are we serving or not serving our kids as they spend time in our system? So are we narrowing the gaps the more time they spend in the system, or the gaps widening?
Mr. Governor, Chair, I don't know that we can answer that. I mean, that's several audits I think you've described very well.
Job security. It's on my part.
So with regards to your first question about whether or not the prep before they get to middle school, we didn't specifically look at that, but anecdotally, teachers and principals told us that obviously is a key focus. So learning to read at the 3rd grade level and continuing that. But the other thing that these schools are doing is, and Secretary Brown mentioned this, was they're looking at data right before the students arrive at the middle school. So if there are, if a student is behind, these schools that are closing the achievement gap are identifying those deficiencies. They're placing students where they need to be in the classes so that they can get them back up to speed. And there was a real focus among these schools in doing that. So kind of the data-driven understanding of the needs of these students is very key. And so that was part of our recommendation. And we also understand that is a priority for the Department of Education, is assisting schools in identifying where those deficiencies are.
The only other thing I would add to that is that, and this is my opinion, this is not based on our auditing work, is that one of the reasons I believe that we're seeing the achievement gap particularly on students of color, is that we are failing to meet their needs in a culturally sensitive way. And one of the areas that will be compelling to me moving forward is, I know that the Pendleton School District has adopted, worked very closely with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla to adopt a curriculum that is more inclusive of Oregon's tribal history. And if we could isolate that school district over time and take a look at those numbers over time, I think you're going to see in the Pendleton area that those tribal kids will end up doing better in the Pendleton School District. That's just a theory, it's my opinion, but I think that's a really concrete example of how we're working in certain areas to meet the needs of a diverse student body.
I might add that we're already starting to see the needle move in Pendleton with our Native American kids. In particular, the third grade reading this year was very encouraging, as well as the number of credits earned at their charter school.
Nicole?
I just wanted to suggest maybe a sixth area of promise or best practice that we've been learning about at the organization I work for, Northwest Health Foundations, and we do grant making to schools and community-based organizations, and recently several partners of ours and our organization embarked on a process to really create a very intentional equity lens in the way that we invest in schools, and we looked at 3 factors: third grade reading, rates of free and reduced lunch, as well as the achievement gap. And tried to look at those 3 things in order to create a portfolio of those schools that we want to invest in. And we found some really interesting things, one of which was that there are many schools around our state that actually have very, very high poverty rates, who actually have excellent third grade reading scores. And one of the things that we found, and so unfortunately those schools didn't make our list, we prioritized investing in some other schools, but we were very curious about that, and when we looked further and took the effort to actually go and visit many of those schools, one of the things that we saw consistently was that there was an overwhelming trend that those schools had deep partnerships with community-based organizations, with community groups, and that those schools worked very, very hard to build deep partnerships with the parents and families of the children who had historically not been served well. And so where you might have schools with very similar demographics, you would see some schools that were having 95% at or above reading rates, and then you would see another school at 20, 30%. And a lot of the things that you mentioned are absolutely true, but we found that to be very, very intriguing and interesting as we continue to incentivize and think about supporting schools to partner differently and make schools truly a hub of education for the whole community.
So I loved your comment around the schools that you visited and the family atmosphere and the 5 areas that you talked about, the common practices. I think it is all about that atmosphere that you create for learning, and that love of learning, the expectation that everyone will succeed, the stepping up and wearing your specific university in garb on Friday. Yeah, you go if you have to. No. And I'm sorry Vic isn't here to say Winfield. But I really appreciate that. I want to go to page 7 on the report, and it talks about the factors that impact student achievement. And you have a long list here of those things that impact. And I just wanted to ask you, because in the header here, are these the out of school, or is this inclusive of in school, out of school? What is a nice list of things that we've been talking about. These are priorities. Is this what we should be as a board? Should we be addressing these issues if we really want to move that?
My first reaction is some of them are in school and some of them are out. Things like high absenteeism is definitely something that schools can work. I mean, it kind of crosses the boundary because parents and families are a key part of that also. But family income is another one that is clearly outside the school bounds. So it's a mix of things, but that's what the research seemed to indicate was that there's just a variety of factors that all come into play that influence the ability of children to close that achievement gap and for the schools to be able to do the same.
Hannah, also in response to your question, we did an audit, and maybe Sharon can remind me of the date, on educating and supporting teachers that addresses a couple of the factors in this particular list. Inexperienced teachers and teacher preparation. So we can certainly send you the link and provide you that as well. Oh, we also did a report on the GED, on our GED program in Oregon high schools and community colleges, and I'm happy to send that to folks as well. I don't want to overwhelm you with audits.
Really?
Well, I'm
Hard
happy
to
to do
tell.
so, Governor, if you want to read them.
I think what this list points out to me is that it's not demanding what the curriculum is, but it's providing the learning environment. And I think that's one of the things that I would point us to, again, is if we create the learning environment in which is outlined here, then we can address the achievement gap. We need not push a whole lot of thou shalt use this curriculum, but we really need to build that learning environment is what I see in what you're telling us.
If I could just add one little, and we saw a big overlap between this and the audit we did looking at educating and supporting teachers, that there's kind of two learning environments that happen. One is for the students and the other is for new teachers and developing teachers. That being able to build that collaboration among teachers in a building is key for achieving, a greater success for students and for the teachers themselves professionally.
On a high note, one of the significant contributors to absenteeism is dental problems, and with the AC expansion, almost all kids have health insurance coverage now, and we're integrating dental care, which would hopefully address part of that problem. Okay, thank you very much. Good job. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and energy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rob, you want to? Pardon? Yeah. Not sure why.
Just looking for money.
That's it.
Good afternoon, Governor, Chief Education Officer Golden, and members of the board. Rob Saxon, Deputy Superintendent of Instruction. And with me today is David Bautista. David is Assistant Superintendent at the Oregon Department of Education and Office of Learning, and he's in charge of our equity unit, and is a fabulous colleague at the department. I want to thank Secretary Brown and the great work that she and her audit team did on this, and really shone a bright light on some things that I think they're important for us to shine bright lights on here in the state, and to give us one more look at some of the issues that I think that we have in making sure that we're achieving that for our students. And also just want to appreciate the diligence that our auditing team put into the work. They asked lots of questions, spent a great deal of time on this, making sure that we had all this put together, and they did a great job of putting this together. I would say, I do want to point out that, in this audit, they showed a very specific set of data, 8th grade assessment results. And what I would tell you is that when we look at assessment results across just about any subject, if we do large-scale assessment on math and English language arts, you will find very similar achievement gaps. But we can look at other data besides just the assessment results, whether we want to look at attendance, graduation rate, or whatever, and you'll see very similar kinds of gaps. And so there's a great consistency in achievement gaps for our students. Unfortunately, it's something that we clearly want to address. I thought what we could do today, just real quickly, is perhaps David talk about a few of the things that we currently have underway. We're pleased to have this report by April. We looked at that and immediately began to implement some of the things that were identified in it. We also have begun some work out of the 2013 session with some of the strategic investments that you all helped form up for that very much get at some of these achievement gaps. And then I would love to spend a little bit of time taking a look at some of the proposals that you all looked at today and made recommendations to the governor about that we have upcoming, and then be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to explain what is the work that we are doing at the department. And as the Deputy Superintendent expressed, this is a new unit under the Learning Department in which we focus exactly in this type of results. One of the things that I would like to stress is when these elements are identified, strong leadership, data information, collaboration, high expectations, safe and positive learning environment, they're not just labels. They're big dimensions in terms of what does it mean to be a strong leadership and understand how to guide the school. In the case of the identification of 39 schools, we like to call them model schools, is to being able to disseminate that practice. One of the things that right away we worked on was to develop a team for the culturally responsive pedagogical practice and get that run into the schools, working with community-based organizations and universities. One particular group that we have here at Oregon State University is with Dr. Moridara and Dr. Este de la Vega, that they're looking into more elements, variables about the model schools, quantitative and qualitative, in order to understand clearly the sustainable practices that we can commend to the other schools. That's the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Debbie. Certainly, there were several elements that were important, I think, in the audit that was done around some of the elements in the report card and the way that we look at data and split it out among various subgroups and review it on a periodic basis, actually yearly basis, and then also sharing the effective practices and then supporting schools and districts as they ramp up those practices. I thought it was really important to take a look at the 5 key themes in closing achievement gaps, and then also take a look at the work that you all have just had underway and figure out where those 2 things go together. I know that sometimes people across the state have a tendency to call it take a look at the equity lens and call it the OEIB equity lens. I think it's been adopted widely enough and considered widely enough across the state that to call it the Oregon equity lens. And the work that we went through to make sure that each one of these proposals was considered in reference to the equity lens that we had previously adopted. And so when we take a look at reading from really age 3 to grade 3 initiative that you all have underway, certainly is very much targeted at closing achievement gaps and considers teacher collaboration, data-informed instruction, and strong leadership, and high expectations and high support for all students within the components that are part of that. Where the district support for low-performing schools is very much about closing achievement gaps. When we look at our underperforming schools, too often we see that students of color attend those schools, and that within that work, safe, positive school environments, high expectations, and high support, teacher collaboration, all these components are written within those. Ninth grade on track, CTE formula change, ULL formula change, high school equivalency are all components of that. And I think it's incredibly important, as well as what I see in the early learning components of what has been recommended here today. So very excited about the work that we do have underway and that we're about to have underway as a result of what you all have done, and the light that was shed on that and the way that we can think about it. And be very happy to answer questions.
Questions for Rob?
So when you first started, you drew the test results as an achievement gap and then the attendance to achievement gap. Can you tell me more about how you draw that?
Well, it simply was that there was a question about, sort of if there was any bias to the assessments that students give that somehow impacts the outcome that we see when it comes to the creation of achievement gaps. I know that as we develop assessments, and Oregon has had its own assessment with the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, that we spend a lot of time to make sure that we do everything that we can to reduce the kind of bias that can show itself up in tests, that we run each test question through several groups that give us feedback about whether or not that they believe there's gender bias in the individual question and collectively. and we do everything that we can to remove that, and that the new Smarter Balance assessment has gone to even larger lengths to ensure that that happens. But I always worry when we look at some kind of a result and say, well, it might not be accurate because, that then we ought to take a look at other kinds of results that would compare and see if graduation rates looked the same for all students, and yet we had some kind of a strange assessment problem. I would want to look closer at the assessment, but when we look across the system at every kind of data result that we get, we see that they're achieving that.
Well, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are at the point on our agenda where we hear from our Chief Education Officer.
Thank you.
Update us, please.
I will do that. You know, it's interesting how closely these agenda items have fit together today, from the investments and really looking at our students in the gap and the opportunity gap, and making sure that our investments align with our students in the opportunity gap. And what we know is when we support them, we support all students, because if all students can get to kindergarten, I get to third grade reading proficiently, the whole class is doing acceleration. Nobody needs to do remediation, and I think that's really part of the dream. I just want to talk about 3 things that are happening with OEIB and all our wonderful partners here. The first one has been referred to, but I do want to talk about 2 meetings to me that have been transformational, critical, and you'll continue to see more. The first was the third grade reading proposal, and I believe that is a strong proposal, one that all of us who are doing this work can say we can meet a 95% reading at grade level in 4 years, because we cast the net a lot broader. We brought together not only people who work within our schools, work within our agencies, but people from our community-based organizations who, with culturally specific groups, have really already closed achievement gaps. And what we realize is that they're critical partners to help us come together and make sure there is no such thing as an opportunity gap. That proposal, I think, is very well formed. I see a lot of support around that proposal, and we could not do it if that group wasn't significantly different. Governor, I really appreciate that you say we're going to do more of that in the future, and I want you to know that we all support that 150%. The second group took place actually this last Saturday, I think, using that same model. We came together and we looked at particularly what Danny refers to in lanes about systems change of outcomes with current funding. So we looked at the ELL formula. We spent most of our time on that, and then 9th grade on track and the CTE, again with a group that not only represents, with a very broad cast of people, a lot of leaders from our community of colors who have been very effective in making a difference for our kids in the opportunity gap. So I thought there was great conversation. We've learned a great deal. I think we're only going to get stronger by doing this. So just know you're going to be seeing more of this. I would like to say this is the norm. If we are going to do important work for kids in the opportunity gap, or all kids, it's going to be with a much larger table than we saw before. So that was great. And then 2 other things I would just like to point out is, well, one was in relationship to the early reading by 3rd grade. We did have a conference last week around making sure, and this was part of the recommendation from this group, that kindergarten really is culturally specific. It really meets the needs of all of our children, and we are using best practices as we go towards a recommendation of all-day kindergarten. So there was a conference that really started us thinking deeply about that. And then the other thing we've been doing, which I think is great, is story time every day, everywhere. We've been to 4 communities, and the next community we go to, the governor's going with us. He'll be with us with Reynolds School District. but we've been to the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and Willamina Elementary School, the Reedsport, North Bend, Coos Bay District, Ontario, Nissa, and Vale, and the Klamath Tribes in Klamath County. When we came up with story time, we met with these communities ahead of time. We listened to the communities about what was going to work with them. And we actually have been working with members of the community to launch this story time every day, everywhere. And what we know is that if we start early and we talk to our children, or we sing with our children, we play with our children, we tell stories with our children, which there's so many great storytelling cultures in our state, that will really build the kind of vocabulary that will bring our children to school ready to learn. So a lot already going on to get going at this work. We're just going. And I think that, right? Our children need us going and going now. So those are just 3 things I wanted to share.
Great, top that, Ben.
That'll be hard.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Any questions for Nancy? Okay, then we're going to hear the recommendations for the meeting in the middle 40.
Great.
Ben and David.
Great, so I'll kick this off and then hand it over to David Reeves. So I'll just remind the board that back in March and April of this year, you reviewed and endorsed a definition, if you will, of the middle 40, a clarification of 40-40-20 that spoke partly to demography, spoke to how to sort of think about age cohorts relative to 40-40-20, and tried to define with somewhat greater clarity the middle 40. You endorsed a broad understanding of what counts, including associate's degrees, 1-year certificates, career pathway certificates issued by community colleges, and a variety of other credentials. You then went on to ask 2 things of the HEC in consultation with OIB, the Oregon Workforce Investment Board, CCWD, the Department of Employment. You asked that we first compare actual and projected labor market needs with actual and projected educational attainment levels. That's work underway at the HEC, and while we have not met your September 30th deadline, we are close to being able to bring that back. It's actually coming to the HEC later this week, and we'll forward that work on to you. And secondly, and what we're here to speak to in part today, you asked that we create a further articulation of the degrees, certificates, and other credentials that should constitute the middle 40, and analyze the state of Oregon's ability to track and count those degrees, certificates, and credentials. Partly as a result of this recommendation that you adopted in the spring, and also as a result of an executive order from the governor, a group was created, a HEC OIB task force. It was staffed by the governor's workforce policy advisor, Agnes Palasa, as well as staff from the respective agencies, employment, CCWD, the HEC, and it provides, among other things, an answer to your request for further articulation of the middle 40. It also provides a variety of recommendations around how our education system and our workforce system should work together to manage the development of degrees, certificates, and workforce training to meet especially middle 40 needs. So I'm going to turn it over to David Reeves, who both as a representative of the OEIB and as a member of the HEC was one of the key members on that task force. I don't know if David can keep track of all the task forces, but this was a number of meetings that he participated in.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, it was actually a very good meeting between members of the post-secondary and workforce training in the state to kind of better define what each sector's roles were and how we could work closer together. And I would say it was very successful with some of the conclusions we came to that you can see in the report. They cover about, I would say, 5 broad areas. The definition of the middle 40, what the outcomes are for that, data collection and usage of data, collaboration between workforce and education, and finally investment. I'll go into a little more detail on those. First one was a definition of what that middle 40 was. I'm glad to say that the representatives from the Workforce Investment Board agreed with what we've already confirmed on this board and on the HEC for a very broad definition of that middle 40, not just to be talking about recent high school graduates coming into the middle 40%, but actually all working age adults in Oregon, or up to a certain level, but including all adults in Oregon. And talking about ways too about how better to assess the needs of a lot of adults out there in the middle 40, that these people do need continuing training and retraining through their careers, that I don't think anybody's fooling themselves that once you get that college degree or college certification, you're set for life anymore. So we talked about ways that we should be looking at ways to better assess the needs of adults in the middle 40 and serve their needs and employers' needs throughout people's careers. Another thing we talked about was common outcomes. It was kind of apparent when we came together, we spoke different languages. We were in education talking about credits and credentials and diplomas. Over the workforce end, it's more just employment. Yes, skills, ready for employment, and are you employed or not employed? So trying to talk about ways that we can talk about common outcomes and share those outcomes as goals with each other, like entering employment, gaining skills, gaining credentials, and things like finding good employment. So ways we can combine those outcomes. Another thing the group talked about was ways to work with the data we have and to better coordinate the data systems we have. I thought this was really exciting. This wasn't really a suggestion as we came into the group, but really came out of the group discussions, both with the existing data we have with students' transcripts and such, but more so really enrolling or co-enrolling students into some of the work source data systems, the WOMIS and the PRISM. Don't ask me what they mean, you can read the report for more details. But basically, data systems that really help employers find employees and help potential employees find employment throughout the state, and better ways to co-enroll students so when they're completing their degree or program, they're also going into the state system to help them match them to employers. And it also helps us better track to the success rate of students as they're entering the workforce. So the report talks about ways we can expand those possibilities and use the data systems together. Another thing we talked about was facilitating collaboration between workforce and education in a variety of ways. One of them was talking just about a policy summit we have to get the two sectors together on a regular basis, either twice a year or once a year. I think the report says twice a year actually. But that talent, some kind of talent, talent summit also to highlight some of the graduates coming out of the education system with skills that are really highly sought after by employers. Things like that. It's really a chance to bring together educators and people working in the workforce, both employers and people helping people find employment, a way to bring them together in one venue or one event and help people start talking together about ways we can work together better. So I thought those were good. It was a good suggestion. And finally, final suggestion was for investment and a way for us, both working in workforce and education, to combine for workforce strategies to strengthen career technical education, for example, in ways that we could both work together. And even there's a suggestion there for some kind of common funding pot or something, a pot of money that workforce and education could use in a combined way to really help each other. These are really good. I think the two systems haven't really communicated in this kind of way up to now. It's either been spotty, it's been institution by institution, as say community colleges talk to specific employers, or forecasts come out for the state outlook and they get sent on to the colleges. But I think this is a really good way to talk about ways the Higher Education Boarding Commission and the Workforce Investment Board can really get together in some concrete ways and really work in a coordinated way. So I don't know if there's any comments or questions on the report, if you've had much of a chance to look at it.
Just in terms of process, as I understand it, it is hoped that the OEIB will endorse these recommendations and do so at the next meeting. This would be a first reading where you have some chance for discussion, feedback. There may be questions that we need to follow up with you on before this comes back to your agenda.
Just a
Yes,
clarification.
yeah.
So what in fact we would be supporting is the recommendations that are contained in the executive summary, or there's 10 of them?
That is correct. So I think, yes, we are asking the OEIB consider the 10 recommendations that have been adopted by this task force and endorse those. So they start in more detail in the report on page 13, but they're contained in summary in the executive summary and then in greater detail starting in page 13.
Yeah, please, go on.
So first I want to acknowledge the great work once again in this group. It's really exciting to see it coming together. Because I have not been a part of this work, what would be helpful to me, and I don't know if you would like to respond to it now, or maybe you can send me something, or maybe send it to the full board. I'm curious, out of these recommendations, are there some that might have barriers, and do you know what those are right now, what you might do to get through them? And is this a hierarchy of sort of prioritized recommendations? I don't know how to help understand the recommendations and how likely those kinds of things will happen. So I know that there's things that need to happen early on when we put together a set of recommendations like this, and there are things that are more sort of aspirational. So I just was wondering if you thought about that right now.
But I don't want to, I think I can give a better answer by following up with you and the board in consultation with other folks who are involved. That was just one of them. I don't think these are ordered in terms of a hierarchy of priority. Especially on your first question, barriers, yes. I think some of these clearly have greater levels of challenge associated with them than others. And in consultation with others who participated, we can certainly highlight that for you.
So
Yeah, it was really talking about how to bring the two systems together and collaborate in a way that I don't think we've done before at the state level. But you're right, we've got to talk more about the prioritization and what would come sooner and what wouldn't.
And I'm okay if you don't have that done yet. I just would like to know a little bit more about how you're thinking about that, because I think it helps when communities to see, what can they expect, like what's going to show up first. And same thing for, I think, our board. What are we going to see places? Are there places where there's already traction and already work happening, and are there places where the group has clearly more to do there? That's really just in a general sense is what I'd like. I don't expect you to do a ton more work around it, because I know this is a lot of work, but just kind of helping me understand.
Ron and then Nicole.
Okay, well, you talked about two things, and Vaughn kind of mentioned it at the end, but some of it's doing a better job, training more people. Some of it seems to be just counting better what we already do. So what's your sense of how much sort of better the situation is if we were counting better than what we kind of otherwise do? There's a lot of emphasis on let's count this, let's count that, which suggests you think we're actually in better shape than maybe we've been hearing.
I think a lot of it's actually sharing that data, that it's not just getting counted for work source or for education, but actually sharing it, and then starting to analyze this, going more into what Yvonne says about, going into it deeper, but starting to analyze and how to use those. And I wouldn't say that's particularly spelled out here is how to use that, but you're raising a good point.
Well, but do you have a sense that that middle 40, that there are more people in that middle 40 than maybe we've been thinking there are? More people already attaining that? That seemed to be what you're suggesting, and I'm just curious.
I would say that the emphasis of the task force, and some members in particular, was to try to draw attention, especially to people coming from higher ed, to a variety of training opportunities and related credentials that may not be associated with formal education even, but should constitute the middle 40. And we've called out some of that here, or a portion of the middle 40. And I think if we were to sort of add, a variety of training, certificates, badges, some of what's suggested here, you would get to a number that probably looks better than the one that we're familiar with when we think of primarily associate's degrees and community college certificates. So, does that mean that we're doing great on middle 40? No, we have a long way to go, but this attempts to sort of, consistent with the OEID's recommendation, take that broad understanding and suggest, as we get better at tracking it, we'll find that there are a lot of opportunities for folks who are making some gains.
Nicole?
Sure. So I think I've asked this question before, but I'm going to ask it again. But first I'll say there's a lot of really good work in here, so I really appreciate that. And I'll focus on my question and one suggestion. So on page 9, it kind of paints where we are in 2012 and where we want to get. And the part that I'm still grappling with is that the chart that's reflected here is really a reflection of all the benefit our state has received from the number of individuals who have migrated to our state with a high school diploma and all the individuals who have migrated with advanced degrees and college degrees. And so this looks like we only have 9% of folks who haven't graduated from high school, but if we just looked at Oregon kids, it would be much, much higher. And so our current status quo has us benefiting from migration. And so it just seems like, I'm just curious how the committee thought about strategies around that and what you want to reflect. And I think we want to be as honest about what our problem is, and it just seems like we might want to channel resources or strategies around that. So that would be one point that I'm just really, as I read through this, I just struggle with that concept and trying to figure that out. Another piece I might add is that Nancy and her team and Rob and Danielle have done some phenomenal work reaching out to a diverse group of stakeholders to get their input on a variety of other initiatives we've brought forward. And I noticed that the table that you set to sort of give input on this could perhaps reflect Oregon a little bit better, and maybe you could reach out to some of their stakeholders to get another lens of input for when we see the whole proposal. I think it would only strengthen the good work that already exists.
As far as the migration, I know the HEC has talked about that. I think that wasn't too big a discussion here, because honestly, when you're talking to, and I don't know if anybody from Workforce is here today, Workforce Investment Board. Yeah.
No one that's willing to admit it, apparently.
When we were talking to them about numbers, they're just looking at the job market. It doesn't matter than migration or, ultimately. So some of that was not things we got too into depth with them, because it is something I'd say we're talking more about at the HEC, about how we're serving Oregonians.
Yeah, and I'll respond to that as well. One thing that the OEIB policy statement from last spring tries to do, that we then imported into this, was we have to kind of hold two views simultaneously. One is, I would say, a more workforce-oriented view that looks at the adult population, the working age adult population, and says, how do their educational levels meet or reflect workplace labor market demands and opportunities? And that's closer to what this graph, and this is a working age adult graph, right? But that then reflects, probably appropriately, the in-migration of folks. We then simultaneously have to be, and this is particularly true for educators, looking at we've called it the pipeline or the shoreline, but that stream of those cohorts of students who are moving through Oregon schools, and how are they faring? And they're not faring this well, at least not in time periods that seem reasonable and realistic. The 91% high school completion that this reflects, the 31% bachelor's degree completion. We have we've seen some really interesting data about the high school sophomores of 2004 and their post-secondary outcomes as of 2012, 6 years after their expected date of high school graduation. And they're not here, right? And they're getting there. They're on their way, but not enough of them reflect this, and there's the gaps on what you've seen from the data. So yes, I think it's a challenge to sort of take and keep both views at once.
So I'd be interested also, since this is the first reading, and when we come back for the second reading, some prioritization, so dates and gates, and then I think one thing I'd be interested in, if all this happened, then what would be different? Like how much would it move the dial? What's left to do? And I guess also just considering the conversation we had earlier. What sorts of things have financial implications beyond what we've already discussed?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure, David, in your discussions when we were in the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee meeting, we were talking about the forecast for the jobs of 2020. As you were talking about what things we need to do to help make sure that as we provide the education to reach the 40 in the middle, are we going to have the jobs that will pay at a level at which they can pay back their student loans, all of those things? Will we have high-paying jobs when we get there? Because the latest data we see is not so promising that there's actually jobs there. So who's working on that?
Yeah, so and that is, it sort of speaks to the first request of the OEIB in the spring, which is to compare what the labor market is paying for with our educational goals and attainment levels. And as I noted, there is a report under development that the HEC is overseeing that tries to get at that. And it basically uses Department of Employment projections about jobs and job openings. And the Department of Employment then associates each type of job with a particular level of education, high school, some college, higher ed. And it attempts to sort of match the two or describe the gaps. And I can be very happy to share that work with OEIB, even in draft form. What I can say, sort of the initial snapshot is similar to the way in which it appears as you look at the chart that Nicole mentioned, that we're doing better on bachelor's degrees. If you merely take Department of Employment projections, which are sort of a status quo projection, like not a lot changes in the world, then we're doing okay on bachelor's degrees in terms of job openings. It's in that middle 40 area where we find employers with gaps to fill. That is a really general story, and what the report also tends to do is then highlight some specific fields where what I just said isn't true at all. There are particular types of bachelor's and advanced degrees that we're really short in, and there are particular types of middle 40 certificates and degrees that we're doing fine in. So it's a complicated story, but it's one that we're working on. I'd be happy to share with you.
So will we have that before we move the recommendations? Will we be able to see, are we on track? Do we have the capacity in Oregon to actually provide those jobs? Or are we, I don't know what your timeline is.
Yeah,
You said
so,
it's in the works.
Yes, it is in the works. The HEC will review what I hope is a sort of near final draft of that report later this week, and be happy to share it whether or not it's in final form. I will say this about that work. It is very much a status quo projection, right? It doesn't assume that the economy changes. It doesn't assume that our efforts on education create and uplift the economy. So it just comes from that perspective. If nothing were to change, here are the job openings we expect to have.
Great. Anybody else? Thank you for the report. So we'll have we'll take action on the recommendations at the December 9th board meeting. So at this point, we're going to shift to public comment, and we have a fairly long list of people here today. I want to thank everybody for coming. And just as a reminder, that each individual speaker or group spokesperson will have 3 minutes to present. And with that, I'm going to ask our first presenter, Mary Whitmore, to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very
In
much.
one system.
That's right.
I'm
That's
a
right.
retired teacher from Forest Grove, and I have audaciously self-proclaimed myself to be an ex officio member. I've come to so many of these meetings. I have a poem for you. I come to ask our children's forgiveness. Over the last 10 years, only half of Oregon school-age kids have learned to read. We looked the other way. We blamed everyone and everything we could over the last 10 years. It's a crisis. It's an emergency. Pull out all the stops. 94 years ago, Dr. Orton worked side by side with his wife to help dyslexics read. They figured it out. 71 letter and letter combinations to make the 42 sounds of English in the order of frequency used. They figured it out, and they gave it to history for free. In honor of all Oregon kids and all American school kids left illiterate, I ask forgiveness, and I pledge to work with you to begin to heal this horrifying neglect. Convene summer explicit phonics literacy camps until 90% of our children can read, spell, write, speak, listen, and think. Then and only then can you reach for 40-40-20. I would also take issue with what you said about expecting kindergarten 3 outcomes to be any different in the future, because you are not changing reading instruction curriculum. You can see kindergarten learning gains with easy CBM, which I believe should be required in all districts. Seth has several documents to support my vision, and you can get any or all of these from him after adjournment. One, a draft of LC 384, which requires explicit phonics materials to be available in every district. A statement I prepared for the 5th of November OEIB meeting, which I actually missed. And a draft letter to Dr. Henry, PSU Board of Trustees, and a resolution to establish those literacy camps. And also I have a copy of the last 10 years of all state reading, which shows the 56% literacy rate averaged over the last 10 years. And also Mitch Charter School, last 10 years, their average is 90% literacy. And that's all.
Great, thank you for coming in today. Next up is Jim Anderson.
I'm from King, EPA, and from the Operation Easy. And I was very enheartened to see the emphasis on early learning. I didn't see the statistics go on the need for improvement in early learning. All I saw was the 8% increase that's desired. Is there a figure on what the percentage is now? They were going to increase 8%?
So we can ask the staff to get back to you afterwards. This is an opportunity for you to provide comment.
Okay, yeah, and I would like to say that this is a very key figure, I think, that we need to have in front of us, because we're putting a lot of money into improving this figure. It's significant to observe it and work with it when we try to get the third grade reading level up to 95%. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Deb Mayer.
I'd like to talk to you about an election that was held in Indiana and why it's important to Oregonians. The election was for the Indianapolis School Board. The reason it's important to Oregonians is that Stanford children bought the election for education reformers. Stanford children is often called upon for public testimony, invited to for public testimony by the OEIB, and also is used as a consultant by the OEIB. I think if Stanford Children's policy is to input large sums of money into school board elections so that the will of the people is not followed, that we shouldn't stick our heads in the sand here. We should look around and see what's happening at other places and know that Stanford children may not have the best interests of children at heart. The three people that won in Indiana are not for the same kind of policies that we are for. They're for-profit charter schools. They're for high-stakes testing. And they are for unlicensed teachers in the classroom. If this is the agenda of STAN in other states, why are we consulting with them to set policy here in Oregon? I think we need to think twice before we support or consult with people that aren't for smaller class sizes. They aren't for strong public schools. They aren't for professional teachers. And that's what we want here in Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Duffel?
Dr. Golden, just last week, the King Elementary School in the Northeast, Vicky, the King Elementary School, the population is over 45%, was declared one of the worst schools in Oregon. Nobody talks about it. I don't hear anybody talking about it. Is it because it's over 45% black? Is that why? Because we are a disconnected nation. We're not together. Don't let me get away with that, but I want to say it. We are a disconnected people. So therefore, that school is sitting there. Nobody is talking about it. Nobody is doing anything about it. I need to say that. Nobody doing anything about it. Those kids over there from elementary school, they used to feed into Jefferson High School. Gang members. That community where that school is located, I have buried over 13 kids in that place. Young boys killing each other. I need some help. I want you to follow me to King Elementary School. Gary Buckman, a good friend, they have just delivered an incredible information to us. I love what they deliver to us. That school, the staff is disconnected. No leadership, as far as I'm concerned. We can't do that to the black Americans. is too painful to me. Because this country has been good to me. I came from somewhere to get an education. I got one, the best. A doctor, a PhD, all over the place. I'm well established. But the black Americans, why? Right in my face. I'm not reading a history book. This is right on my lap. Those kids out there. You know what it does to me when I go there physically? I am sick. Just physically sick when I go there. In America. In Portland, Oregon. Follow me to King Elementary School. Is that right?
Thank you. Dana Hepper?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to provide some quick public comment. My name is Dana Hepper. I'm the Director of Policy and Program at the Children's Institute. And I wasn't quite sure about taking the time to testify, but after hearing the conversation, I wanted to just say a couple words very quickly and lift up and really appreciate a few points in the budget that weren't explicitly called out in the discussion today, but that I think are really important for reaching 40-40-20 and Oregon's long-term goals for kids. So just by way of context, the first 8 years of a children's life are critical. This is when they experience the most profound growth, cognitively, socially, and emotionally. By the time a child is 5, so by the time we're getting them to kindergarten, their brain has already grown to 90% of its adult size. And we see gaps in opportunity of children. We can actually test and find gaps as early as 9 months old. So those gaps widen by preschool, they get wider still by kindergarten, and widen again by 3rd grade. So we know we need to get to kids early. So there's some really promising things there. I also, when I talk about gaps, I also feel the need to talk about strengths hand in hand. And just one quick example, we're learning now that children who are bilingual demonstrate greater cognitive flexibility and creative problem solving from a very young age. We were just at this conference where we saw these beautiful videos of babies trying to problem solve with no kind of a box, and watching bilingual baby after bilingual baby just nail it, and monolingual baby not. So I just think we want to also lift up family, ethnic, cultural, and community strengths that we can build on whenever we talk about gaps facing kids. So all this is just to raise and appreciate the commitment in this budget to early learning, and the $135 million proposed investment in early learning is going to have a significant long-term return on investment. So very quickly, a few of these. The home visiting programs are receiving increased funding in this budget. Home visiting programs begin to engage families in children's learning and development. They support healthy relationships between parents and children. They reduce child abuse, and they increase kindergarten readiness. And currently only 1/6 of eligible families have access. There just simply aren't enough slots. High quality preschool. Children without access to high quality preschool are 25% more likely to drop out of high school, 50% more likely to need special education.
You're at your 3 minutes. If you could just wrap up your concept.
Yes, 60% less likely to attend college. We're obviously need more slots and spaces there. And the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund meets a key need of creating a seamless system of education on the early end. And so we're just glad to see these investments and want to appreciate the governor and his staff for putting them there. Thank you so much.
Next is Eric McCartney.
My name is Eric McCartney. I'm a teacher with Portland Public Schools, though I in no way represent my employer in anything I say or do. I just want to make that clear. I've been teaching in the same Title I school in Portland Public Schools for 7 years now in outer southeast Portland. We have been identified as a priority Zone 1 school for a number of years based on Oaks test results year after year. We have had, obviously, through the Title I program, additional funding from the federal government, as well as extra funding through district and other state programs. What I've noticed the last 7 years in my stint at that school, by the way, it's Kelly Elementary, it does happen to be home of Portland's only direction immersion program, which I think is a strength, is the changes that have come down that have affected me and my fellow educators in that building and in other buildings across the district have felt almost entirely top down. The decisions and policies in place seem to have not been made with any sort of consultation with those of us who actually educate your children. Does this make sense? It does not make sense to me. Some of these, I was looking at the proposal here that Danielle put together, and again, I agree, that 3rd grade, that benchmark, if a kid doesn't read by 3rd grade, it doesn't look good. And I know this, I'm a 5th grade teacher, but I feel that these top-down decisions are not always being made with proper thought. The Common Core State Standards, which have been mentioned here once or twice, an example of a change in the Common Core State Standards. We're talking about literacy. There's a Lexile scoring system. I won't go into details as to how that works, but it's a numerical system that it evaluates a book level and a reader. It does 2 things at once, and you try to match the kid to the level. Well, part of that increasing rigor of the Common Core State Standards, they had to realign those Lexile scores. All they did was increase the level. So now something that was 4th, 5th grade band in a Lexile scoring system is now considered to be in like the 2, 3, or 3, 4 band. And literally just raising a bar and telling someone to jump higher doesn't do it. And that's my concern. So I'm just asking, as an educator, whom I am very proud of the work I do, and my fellow educators. I feel it's the most important job in the world. I'm sure you all have very important jobs as well, but I think mine's more important. No offense. Please respect, not us. I don't care. Call me names, spit on me, whatever. I don't care. Respect my children. Listen to us.
You're at 3 minutes if you could. Thank you.
No doubt my 3 minutes is over. Don't assume because it makes sense, it's logical, that it will actually work in a classroom. It's far too complex for that. That's all I ask.
Thank you. Next is Melvin Odin Orr. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you. How did you know?
I wrote all the names.
Pam Blumenthal. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Pam Blumenthal. I'm the director of Links Programs at Portland Community College, but I'm here today as a representative of the Coalition of Metro Area Community Schools, also known as CMAX. CMAX is made up of 13 programs and schools who contract with Portland Public Schools and other districts to serve students who left school without a diploma or GED, or students who are significantly behind on credits and will not graduate with their class. 7 of our programs are specifically focused on preparing students who are 17 to students who are aged 17 to 21 to pass their GED test and helping them plan their transition to college and career. In the last school year, CMAX GED programs served nearly 900 Portland Public School students. Some think of CMAX as a safety net. I like to think of our programs as a fresh start. The majority of our students are 18 and older. Of the students we served last year, 60% were male, 57 were students of color, 57%. Some people think that public schools should be doing a better job retaining and serving the students who come to our programs. I agree that we all need to adapt and evolve to meet the changing needs of students. However, some of the situations facing young people make surviving and thriving in comprehensive high schools nearly impossible. Our students are homeless, pregnant and parenting, struggling with mental illness, and in recovery from drug and alcohol abuse. They may be queer or struggling with identity, living on their own or in foster care. They have often experienced bullying and abuse. Our students are also intelligent, resourceful, hopeful, and resilient. They have grit, but they need the right opportunities and settings in which to thrive. We provide smaller environments where students are heard, understood, and supported. We are not salvaging students who have been failed by a system, but rather helping young people rewrite their stories and strive for their dreams. I'm encouraged by the work that you've been doing to discuss and elevate the GED. We certainly need money to address the needs of students who we cannot serve because of the limitations of the contracts we have with school districts. But we also need the GED to be viewed as a valid means for young people to transition into the next phase of their lives. I'm concerned about the minimal impact that $2 million can do to really elevate this. It's not clear to me how the money, there's a bit of disconnect for me between how the $2 million can impact an increase into 41,000 GEDs attained. I'm not sure exactly how that money will be spent. I think it's possible to also create more capacity by policy change that motivates school districts to contract with programs that support students beyond the age of 19.
Your time's about up.
I'm hopeful that what you're doing will continue to gain momentum and that eventually we will have sufficient funding to support all students who want to rewrite their stories and move forward with their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. I just noticed there's somebody else from the same organization that,
No, it's a different organization.
that there's somebody later on, Amanda Moynihan, also from outside.
She's from outside in.
Okay.
Oh.
I guess you're signed up twice. So the next person is Melvin Odenor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Melvin Odenor. I'm here on behalf of the City Club. As many of you know, last year we conducted a research report related to the GED and the changing GED. Since that time, the City Club has appointed an advocacy committee, and I'm the chair of that advocacy committee, working with what we call a coalition of GED providers who work in that field. I wanted to speak with you today to basically say that we're really in support of the work that the Equity and Partnerships Subcommittee has been doing, and again, I encourage you to continue to stay that course. We're very in support because, among other things, their work and the budget that you've implemented, including the $2 million piece, does a couple of things that we called out in the City Club report that I think are important. The first one was the coordination at the state level with the programs, higher education as well as primary. The other one is the focus on the wraparound support services and the need to provide those. I think Pam Blumenthal mentioned that as well as the important role that community-based organizations play because of the, in many cases, cultural capacity that they bring to working with young people as they move towards the GED. I do want to say that, members of the coalition see that it is crucial that we focus on high school diplomas, but it is also equally crucial that we ensure that there is a second opportunity for folks who, because of circumstances many times beyond their control, have an opportunity to seek their own success, albeit in a different way. And so for that, we want to encourage you to do that. I appreciate the comments from many of the members earlier about the extent to which the $2 million may or may not move the needle. But given that what we're talking about is a situation where we have over 300,000 individuals who are do not have a diploma or a high school equivalent, and then I think the budget noted that of that we're looking at $100,000 people potentially being impacted by these efforts. I think it's a start. I'll leave it to the people who actually work in those areas as to whether or not it's going to be a substantial start in terms of moving that needle. And I, again, encourage you to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda Moynihan.
Hi, my name is Amanda Monahan. I come from outside in. I'm a lead teacher and school administrator there. We have created a program there, and we're part of CMAX with PAM and PCC and many other organizations in Portland. We provide wraparound specialized services targeting homeless youth ages 17 to 25. So I've been asked to share just a story of the difference that a year can make in truly wraparound services, which is what we provide. And it's a story that starts in June of 2013. A boy came to us, a 19-year-old. He came from a rural family with significant trauma and abuse history. He was 100% homeschooled. And to hear him tell it, his mom gave up when he was 8. And when he became an adolescent and realized that he was gay, life became completely unbearable for him there. So he found his way to us. He'd never been in a classroom. He'd never taken a standardized test. He had frequent panic attacks. He had fear of men. He had depression. He had very low reading and math skills, to put a grade level on it, which we don't really do. It was about less than 3rd grade in math, around 5th grade in reading. And he had little experience writing by hand, which is a unique problem to have today. After he completed 24 hours a week of almost entirely one-on-one tutoring for a full year, along with the daily coordination with his case management and counseling services, his access to shelter and transitional housing, his access to a work experience in our kitchen, and medical services, including glasses, which he very sorely needed. He passed out of all of our growth assessments. We didn't have another test for him to take because he had passed everything. He passed all of his GED tests but one, which was, as you could guess, a math test. He failed that one, and he kept going. We kept hitting out the anxiety and figuring out ways to get through that on the math test. And he did pass that in September. Right now, he's finishing up our career development course. He's signed up to start school at PCC in January. He'll be working in our dog daycare before January. And we will continue to support him for another 4 years to ensure that he's truly successful in college. And that is just a pretty typical story in my world, and a good example, I think, of people that are not served in traditional schools. And again, it is very typical in the clients that we serve. It can cost more, depending on how you look at it, but it's something that I think that we can do, and I have a lot of hope for our community.
Great. Thank you. And Annie Margis, sorry.
That's okay. Happens all the time.
I'm a teacher in front of people all the time, and I'm never nervous. So I apologize.
So my name is Annie Margis, and I've been a teacher of opportunity youth in Outer Southeast Portland for nearly a decade. You could say I'm in the business of second chances, third, fourth chances in some cases. I'm encouraged by the attention that this board has paid to the GED and pursued 40-40-20. However, we must do more. We know, and our students know, that the GED is not the end. The GED is the beginning. And because alone it is not sufficient for students to earn a living wage and traceability, and we need to prepare them for post-secondary education and training. Wraparound supports to get our students there is essential. As Amanda was saying, we also serve students who are highly barriered, homelessness, they've been educated, in some cases incarcerated as adults, gainfully needed, pregnant and parenting. If they're not homeless, they might have home insecurity, they might have food insecurity, mental illness, and they need counseling, they need personal development supports, they need those wraparound services, not just going to school every day and taking classes in their classroom. Schools like mine, Portland Youth Builders, are uniquely positioned to contribute to the middle and the upper 40s, not just the 20. All of our students are coached toward a career that always includes some form of post-secondary education, whether that is a certificate, a degree, into your increments or beyond. However, we must invest more in GED support to get our students there, to help them grasp and create their own second chance.
Thank you. Next, Joe Nunn. Is Joe here? I don't think I see him. Morgan Joyner.
Hi, my name is Morgan Joyner. I'm a student here at Portland State, and I'm a graduate of the public school system. Both of my parents are educators, and I've been hearing and thinking about education my entire life, which has made it a passion of mine. My current enrollment with a group called the Healthy Kids Learn Better Coalition has led me to view educational success from a public health standpoint, which is what I'd like to talk about today. In preparing for this testimonial, I talked to my mom about the number of students we've known over the years whose educational success has been compromised by factors outside of the classroom. I'd like to tell you a brief story about a boy named Nerdine who goes to Hosford Middle School where my mom is currently the principal. Nerdine is an African immigrant from a family who relies on school for access to health resources, daily meals, and a safe place for him to eat. His adult family members do not speak English, which creates a barrier to their engagement in Nerdine's education. He is underweight, and although he has access to free breakfast and lunch at school, he consistently refuses to eat the food because there are no culturally appropriate options. Nerdine is required to take ESL and special education math class as his so-called electives, meaning that he will never be able to take PE while he's at school. Nerdine's story involves a number of compounding factors that disproportionately affect his chances of educational success, and his experiences aren't out of the ordinary for low-income students and families who depend on school resources yet struggle to navigate the system. Interconnectedness of resources plays a major role in students' ability to achieve when they don't have access to strong support systems outside the school setting. It's not enough to focus on college preparation and test scores if we're going to truly improve educational outcomes for Oregon students. A coordinated system of school wellness has to be in place which reinforces students' efforts and removes physical, social, and emotional barriers to learning. You all have been talking about efforts to close the achievement gap, but I'd like to point out, as Dr. Golden mentioned, that the gap doesn't start with achievement, it starts with opportunity. I urge you to make sure that the education system is doing all it can to create opportunities for children to be healthy, because if we do that, it becomes a lot easier to solve problems like chronic absenteeism, low graduation rates, and achievement.
Thank you. Willie Chambers? Willie Chambers? Steve Buell? Oh, I'm sorry, Steve, sorry, are you Willie Chambers?
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I didn't sign up for it, but I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity.
You didn't, I got your name right here.
Some people think they're signing in.
Oh. You were signing up for testimony.
That'll teach you.
But if you'd like, you can share your thoughts for 3 minutes.
Just overall, I appreciate all that's being done with our education system. Clearly, we have a national and a global crisis where we need to do education. Clearly, Nancy, I appreciate all you've done and what you're doing. Nicole, there's a number of people I could do that. Just say thank you. Clearly, we know the obstacles and the hurdles that we have before us. And I'll just say, clearly, that's what we need to do. Some of my colleagues, community-wise, have spoken some of those, so I don't need to repeat. It's just what we need to do to make sure that our youth and our young adults and our kids are prepared for the 21st and the 27th century.
Thank you. Steve, unless you just were signing in. Just kidding.
Wish it was the case.
Not true.
First of all, I just have two short things. One is, I don't want anybody on this board, or in the state of Oregon governmental system, or any educator telling me that Oregon can protect the data in our longitudinal database system for children in this state, not after the data breach in the Oregon Employment Department. So I just don't want to hear it anymore. I want, when you go out and talk to parents, I want you to be able to say, no, we're going to take the children's data, we're going to put it in a longitudinal database, and we can't protect it, so it will probably be taken by criminals to use, and that should be what put on your brochures and stuff so people understand that. That's clear and perfectly clear. The second thing is kind of interesting. We've talked a lot about the opportunity gap, but just a little bit about the opportunity costs of the program that was put forth for today, $870 some million. If you have the last time you went to the legislature, it was $75 million, which is 750 teachers out of the public schools in Oregon. Because, well, it's more than that's about 800 teachers out of the public schools in Oregon that you take out of the classroom to spend the money someplace else. And now at $870 million, you're about at 9,000 teachers. So we're going to have 9,000 less teachers, which is perfectly okay if that's the decision you want to make. I just think people should know. When you make this decision, you say 9,000 less teachers in your public schools, and in the former public schools, 600 less teachers, because you've got, let me see, we have 68 elementary schools, I believe, so that's 7 or 8 teachers that we could put into every elementary school in the city of Portland if you didn't have this organization, the Oregon Education Investment Board, doing your investments and stuff. I'm just saying, I'm not even putting a value system on that. I'm just saying, you need to understand that's the opportunity costs that you're dealing with in this state. Okay? And just so everybody's clear, and hopefully they'll pick that up in the newspapers and on television and say, okay, 9,000 less teachers. No problem, 600 less employment. So it's great. The third grade reading stuff it's a little, I like that third grade reading, but it's a little weak to me. You might want to put some people in there to deal with kids who are struggling instead of just thinking about classroom. So very good. Having a good day.
Thank you. Rex Higgins.
Thank you all for sticking around to listen to all of us. I know you're all glad to hear from me again. Always a friendly message. But I do want to say, I really think that everybody in this, I want everybody to understand that I at least think everybody at this table and almost everybody in this room have their hearts in the right place. I have serious disagreements with many things you're doing, but I do think we need to recognize that. I would also like to respectfully, I don't disagree but at least comment on what my friend Deb had to say about Stand for Children buying an election in Indiana. I am not known as a fan of Stand, at least not anymore. I once was an award-winning member, and I was fired from the only volunteer job I ever had because I was too disruptive. But I do think Stand has a right to try to influence elections if they want to, as long as they do it legally. I also want to compliment you and everybody on continuing to stress more investment in early education. I've said my former friend Megan, we're probably still friends, but I'm not wild about some of the things, but I really think that's a basic thing that's important. So here, and two more messages, I guess. One is, I just think you ought to think about plain talk in here and in your messages. You guys do. If this broadcast, or if this meeting were to be viewed by the average person in the public, they would run screaming from the streets. What a mess of cliches and bullet points and just plain strange interpretations. Now, that may be the nature of the board. I don't think it has to be. This is cliche city, folks. Over and over again. Okay, the real message I want to deliver today is something I haven't even mentioned. And I think you really need to consider. I once told Samuel, I hope I live long enough to see him deny that he ever had anything to do with this group. I don't really hope that, but I still think the odds are good. We're building a mansion on a firm foundation of sand here. The SBAC tests, folks, are evil. They are badly constructed. They are badly administered. They are bad for our kids, and I don't take my word for it. I can bring 40 different experts that will tell you the same thing. Are you listening to any of them? You're trucking right along here, building a database system, and one of the main sources of your data is a bad one, and it will not stand, and it is not standing. Let's see. First of all, your teachers collectively have asked you for a moratorium. Why? Because the world has already seen as near as we get an education to rebellion.
Mr. Higgins, your 3 minutes is...
Two more points.
Okay.
Bill
Short
Gates
ones, please.
has already, and his crew, who I love dearly, have already said, oh, maybe we ought to wait a year. I personally think they're trying to duck the oncoming wave, but they have. Arnie Duncan has just been quoted as saying, testing is sucking the life out of education. And we're going to go ahead and administer the SBAC to every kid in the state of Oregon? You have to be kidding me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Elizabeth Teal.
Hi, I'm a parent and a teacher. My kids go to Vernon School in Northeast Portland. And I wanted to tell you guys, I wanted to take this opportunity to give you a little bit of perspective about how policies like ranking and labeling schools based on their test scores, how that actually impacts schools on the ground. So 2 years ago, our school was labeled as a focus school by the state. And we were told this was going to give us support to improve our school and better serve our kids. And parents and teachers, I think, were optimistic that we would see some positive changes. And 2 years later, people aren't optimistic anymore. These policies are hurting our schools. In our community, the label of being a focus school is seen as a badge of shame. Our school has long struggled with overcoming a decades-old reputation for being a bad school due to primarily poverty and race issues in the neighborhood. When our school is labeled as a focus school, it's seen by a lot of families as justification to say that's not a good place to send my kid. And then we continue to struggle with enrollment, and rather than creating more equity, which I know is the mission of this group, that policy creates greater stratification in schools and siphons resources away from the communities that need them the most. The policy hurts teachers. Since we've been labeled a focus school, the morale in our school has plummeted. Everything's about accountability to the point that teachers are staying at school till 7 o'clock at night, writing down detailed lesson plans to prove that they're doing what we know that they're doing every day, teaching kids. It's not enough for them to be up in front of the kids doing it. They need to write down 5-point plans on every lesson that they deliver each day. The fear inside of the building of closure by the principal and fear by the teachers trickles down to the kids and creates an environment that is just totally demoralizing. On the recent TEL survey, 100% of staff at our school said that they felt that there was not mutual trust and respect between teachers and administrators. And most importantly, these policies hurt kids. Because of the focus on test scores, raising test scores by any means has been the focus of the school. Kids who don't pass their tests have been taken out of art classes, PE classes, music classes in order to do test prep. Students who are taken out of those things are disproportionately students of color. Students know that our school has been labeled a focus school, which means that we're not doing well, and that is something that sits with them. It hurts their self-esteem. And worst of all, I think in a climate where the adults all know that the survival of the school rests on test scores, kids start internalizing that. And when they don't pass, they see that as a measure of their self-worth. And it is heartbreaking to see kids who are told that they don't pass a test come to believe that that means they're not good students or valuable people. There's just way too much emphasis on it. And the policy of having schools compete against each other for test scores.
3 minutes.
Okay. It's so damaging. I also want to quickly address the fact that at our school, families have really seen the damage that this testing culture has done to kids and have started to decide that it's important to them not to participate in it. Our school was docked 2 levels on the state report card from a level 3 to a level 1, not because of our students' test scores, which is what you say that you're measuring, but because families chose not to participate in the tests. So that furthers the damage that's being done, and it feels like a coercive situation where families have the right legally to opt out of testing, but by doing so, we're being shamed in our community and told that our students aren't doing well academically but on the 5-point system. So in short, it's hurting schools and it's hurting kids to measure schools against each other by test scores. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I want to thank all the educators who came today to share their stories. It's very helpful to all of us. I have 2 more people that signed up. Jennifer Kearns.
I'll be brief because much of my comments have been already stated. I am Jennifer Kearns. I'm a parent of a child at a focus school, Vernon. And I just wanted to echo Elizabeth's comments that these test scores that identify a school as failing, as a 1, as an F, or whatever it is, it draws families that have moved into our neighborhood away from the school, as she just said. It requires teachers to demonstrate what they've been doing. I won't repeat what she just said, but I know that the morale of the teachers is so low, and it doesn't reflect their passion for teaching or student aptitude. The gentleman here said that the testing does not adequately measure what students are doing. And I find that, Bill Gates has turned away from Common Core standards. There are other methods that you can use to assess student performance, and I just find the whole method questionable. The real reasons for students failing or not doing well in school have little to do with what the effectiveness of teachers, but other issues, poverty, public health, etc. So I don't know why you create this system to identify schools as failing. I also, just my last comment, by identifying a school as failing, you limit what can be done in the school. You focus on reading, writing, math, reading, writing, math, reading, writing, math, reading, writing, math. And it limits the educational experience of the students, and thus the diverse curriculum available for children in Oregon are only among the privileged, those who don't go to high poverty schools, that don't get an F grade. So if you are white and affluent, you get to attend a school where there is a diverse curriculum. And so that doesn't seem to be to equity. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Kathy Tucker?
Hi, I'm a parent at Glencoe Elementary here in Oregon, and I'm very concerned about high-stakes testing, this results-based punitive system that I think is damaging our education system. And as a case in point, I'll tell you something that happened in our schools earlier this year. We had a new principal come in, and at her first meeting with the PTA, there were probably over 100 parents in the room. She led her discussion with the fact that 11 families had opted out of state testing the previous year, and that they were threatening the school, that they had caused the score to drop from a 4 to a 3, and that if it happened again, we would drop to a 1, and we would lose recess time and art that is paid for from our residencies, such as our school plays, which is paid for through Fund for the Arts, with parents raise the money for that. And so I really feel that this kind of pressure is caused this, and all of what she said turned out to not be true. Our score did drop, and there weren't enough people to opt them out, but probably next year it will be for that reason. And the other thing is that because we're not a Title I school, we actually don't face any sanctions, any penalties from the state or from the school district. So what you have here is a situation where poor people are being punished in a way that relatively comfortable schools such as ours are not. This system is really getting out of balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody on the phone who wanted to testify?
Yes, Pat Muller.
Okay, can you identify, I guess, proceed, and I'll just, I'm sorry, but since you're not here, I'll, when you get to 3 minutes, I'll let you know verbally.
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
We can, I think. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, I'm Pat Muller. I'm an ELL teacher in McMinnville. And I was at a meeting this Saturday with a bunch of stakeholders talking about the ELL proposal and the Beta 3 proposal. And I was, very excited about the opportunity to have a voice there. And then when I look at the agenda that's brought forth today, it's brought forth with no changes, despite all the input that was given there. So I'm just, wondering, have you not had time to change some of the proposals based upon our input? Was the day I spent just, a total waste of time, and none of my comments or the comments of the superintendents in the room to be taken in consideration? I heard very clearly from superintendents that they don't want to create a system of winners and losers where you're constantly shuffling around money to fund certain programs, but then placing pressures or less importance on other programs, increasing class sizes, regular programs. And I would like to ask the board to take out at least the ELL part from the whole package. I have a feeling this package is just going to go forward as a total package, and there's nothing that can be done to edit it. I'm not quite sure where the proposal came from. It was claimed that it was made at a couple meetings in Seaside and Canada. Yet people are at those meetings say that they didn't work on that proposal there. And Superintendent Saturday said that it looks like a proposal that was made even before those meetings. And so, I'd like to see the minutes of those meetings. And so I guess my main point is I would like to have the opportunity to let the stakeholders group do the work, and do the work thoughtfully of how to improve services to ELO students instead of just, holding a camera over our head and shuffling around money. What changes can we make to improve services to students? Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on the phone? If not, we're adjourned.